My name is Joanne Alberg, and I live here in Lee Summit, Missouri. I've been in this building about a year. And Joe and Annette Burkhart and David and Sharon Lotz helped move me in. And they put me to bed because I had been ill. And they just set the whole apartment up. I haven't changed a thing in it since I moved in day one. And anyway, what I'm holding here in front of you is I always believe that we should leave our children a heritage of our life. A lot of people in the world don't have wealth, money and finances and properties and all those things to leave their children. But one thing I always did was, if we had an experience with God or a special experience as a family or with individual child or something, I would keep notes in a little notebook. And as a result of keeping these experiences in life, this book was put together. Annette Burkhart was unpacking my boxes when we moved me in here, and she came across this book of papers, and she was looking through them, and she said, "Joanne, what are these?" And I said, "They're just testimonies of our family and our experiences together and our life together." And Dad and I raised our two granddaughters. We had them for 10 years. So there's experiences in there about the children. And she said, "Joanne, you've lived 25 years since you wrote the last chapter in this little notebook." She said, "You've got 25 years you need to catch up on." Well, since I've had this seizure business from dehydration, I just didn't think I would be able to sit and write anything else ever. So what I did, I took one full day and prayed about it. The next day I would write a chapter. The next day I would pray, morning, noon, and night, and the following day I'd write a chapter. And that's the origin of how this book began. And when it was all finished, Sharon Lotz typed it up, and she said some of the testimonies touched her to where she burst into tears and she couldn't even type. She'd put it away for 2 or 3 days and get it back out. And as a result, the title, "God is Our Strong Salvation." And I'm sitting here telling you that that is the truest words you'll ever hear. When everything else fails and everything else is tried and tested and you go through life with struggles, God is that salvation. So that's how come this book is. And it's just a book of testimonies. So that's what I have to leave my children. I don't have $1 million, just my book. And my dear brother and sister have come tonight wanting to hear my experience with one of the 3 Nephites. Well, that night I prayed and prayed and prayed for Marion, and I prayed and prayed for Maydell, and everyone else that was sick in that hospital. It was full, believe me, with TB. And so that night, when I went to sleep, this is the part that's hard to tell. I was laying in bed sound asleep, and my eyes popped open, and my door opened, the door to the hall, and there was a light in the hallway. And you know, when you say something, you don't know what else to say, and you just say the first thing that pops into your mind. And I said, "Brother Bailey, is that you?" Because I love old Brother Frank Bailey. He was a dear pastor and a dear man. And I knew it wasn't Brother Bailey, but like I say, you say foolish things when you don't know what you want to say. Well, when the door opened, in came, I'm shaking, in came this large man. He just came under the door, and he had a robe on. And I couldn't see the features of his face. But he came over, and Marion was sound asleep. It was like somebody had knocked her out with drugs. She was so sound asleep you could hardly hear her breathe. And he came over to the bed. He took his hand, and I said, "Brother Bailey, is that you?" And he said, "No." He said, "I have come to administer unto thee." And he laid his hand, his right hand, on my arm. And his hand was large and gentle. It went almost from my wrist almost to my elbow. It was just a big hand and gentle, like a mother holding a baby. And when he said he'd come to administer unto me, I knew right then it was one of the three Nephites. They do walk this earth, and they do minister to heirs of the kingdom. They are there. Sometimes they come in threes, sometimes they go singly to places. And when he administered to me, it was in a tongue I've never heard, a language I've never heard. Before nor since, never heard it in all my life. And I'm 86 years old, never heard it. When he finished administering to me, and he laid his hands on my head, and he anointed my head with oil. I had my hair. And when he started to leave, I begged him to take me with him. When you are in touch with or contact with anything like that happening to you, you don't want to stay on this earth. You just want to go where they go and be where God is and go home. Like really going home to heaven. But I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't move my arms. We had a pole on where you could draw your curtain. And I tried, all I could do to reach up and take that pole. I couldn't move my legs or arms. When he got to the door, I said, if you won't let me come with you, tell me where you're going. And see, in my mind, I thought, as soon as I can walk, I'm going to find this man and go with him. I knew who he was. I knew it was one of the Nephites. And it was hours I laid there, almost till daylight, before I could move. But when he left the door, he turned again, with the light from the hall shining on him, and he said, waken thy roommate and share with her the experience of this night. Those were the last words he spoke. And so finally, when I could move, the sun was, there was a little dawn coming up in the heavens, and I got that pole, and I pushed back the curtain, and I poked Marion, just really poked her. And I said, Marion, I have to tell you something. And I said, I know you're going to think I'm really crazy, and you'll probably have me shipped off to some island in the ocean. I said, last night I had a visit from a heavenly messenger, and I was administered to. And I said, I was told to waken you and share with you the experience of this night. She didn't believe me. She thought, oh no, now what's wrong? Well, when my Elton came in that night, I told him. He said, honey, I knew something happened to you. I didn't know what. But he said, when I woke up this morning, I knew that something had happened to you. And I told him, he cried. So when the doctors came in, then Dr. Stanley, and he gave me that 3 tag. He said, you can get up and walk the hall and come right back to bed. Get a little strength in your legs. So I got out of bed. I was just thrilled. I couldn't get a shower yet. Marion, she had a 5 tag. She could get a shower. I had to have bed baths and all. Well, I was so tickled to put my robe on and get out of bed and just go down the hall. Well, when I went out the door, 305, turned to the left, because I was going to just stop at the door, 305, and check on dear little Maydell. I looked down at the end of the hall. No, Mrs. Strom wasn't at her desk. Mrs. Watkins wasn't at her desk. And that was unlike them. There was always one nurse on that floor. Sometimes both, sometimes only one, but there was always a nurse on the floor. No nurse. I looked and I looked and I thought, my word, where are the nurses? And when I stopped at the door, she said, Joanne, please come in. Come in, you have to come in. And I said, Maydell, you know we can't come in. You know we aren't allowed to go in one another's rooms. She said, you've got to come in. She said, you're the only person I can tell this to. She said, nobody else will ever believe me. And so I said, oh dear God, if I'm to go in there, I said, let it happen. I said, don't let the nurses show up and to scold me or get after me. So I stepped in to her room, and I stood at the foot of her bed. And she told me, she said, Joanne, you're the only person I could tell this to that won't think I'm crazy. She said, I have been laying here for weeks thinking of how I could commit suicide. She said, I couldn't live another day without my babies, my husband, my home. And she said, I didn't know how I was going to end my life, but I couldn't do this anymore. And she said, last night, she said, the door to my room opened, and in came this big man. I said, what was his face like? She said, I didn't see it, but he had kind of like a brown cloth robe on. And she said, he stood at the foot of my bed, and he put his hands on, and she said they were large hands. And he said 3 times, he said, everything will be all right. Second time, everything will be all right. Third time, everything will be all right. And when he turned to leave, she said from her body left this fear and this sorrow and this anguish and agony. He just took it with him. She said it was just draining. And when he went out the door, she knew that she was going to get well. And she knew she was going to get home with her babies and her husband and everything. And her husband was a sweetheart, nice man. And she said, I was wondering how could I commit suicide. Imagine that, a young woman with 3 little children. And she said, but I know now that I'm going to get well and I'm going to go home and be with my family. She said, he didn't tell me, but I know it. She said, but I had to tell you. And boy, the tears, I just burst into tears. So I said, you know what, there's someone you have to tell. I said, you have to tell Marion. She says, oh, she won't speak to me. And I said, you have to tell her. So I went back to my room. I didn't take the walk. I went back to the room and I sat on my bed. And I said, Marion, she hadn't gotten up with her 5 tag yet, and she was going to get up, get a shower, and then get fixed up and get back in bed. And I said, Marion, you've got to go next door. I said, Maydell has something to tell you. She says, I'm not going over there. And I said, you have to. And when I said you have to, it wasn't the Joanne I am that said that. There was a different, not like authority, but there was something in the voice that she didn't want to argue with me, which was unusual. Because boy, she'd scrap at a minute's notice. And I said, please, just go over next door. She said, we can't go in their rooms. I said, there's no Mrs. Strong, there's no Mrs. I said, there's no one, Mrs. Watkins, no nurses out there. I said, you have to go next door. She says, oh, all right. And out of bed she got, and she was gone a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes though. And when she came back in, you should have seen her face. See, he told me to share the experience of that night with her. And I told her, when I came back in, I told her, I said, you have to go next door and hear what happened. Because I told Marion about the Nephite coming, And so when she came back in, her face, the countenance, it was a whole new person inside of that body. And she got in bed, and she didn't say a word, not a word to me. And all I said was, are you all right? And she didn't answer me. And she turned over on her right side and pulled the sheets up where I couldn't see her face. But that night when Elton came in, she sat up in bed and she said, Elton, when I get out of the sanitarium, I want you to baptize me. And that girl was converted from one of the orneriest, cussedest little ladies you'd ever want to meet into such a different person from the gospel.